Private Morgan Wright stumbled through the barracks door, her face streaked with mud and sweat, uniform torn at the shoulder. The rain had soaked her to the bone during the 5-mile run, but it wasn't the weather that broke her spirit. It was Drill Sergeant Hayes's voice still ringing in her ears. "Wright, you're the worst recruit I've seen in 15 years of service. You couldn't defend a paper bag, let alone your country. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Morgan collapsed onto her bunk, muscles screaming from the third failed attempt at the obstacle course. She'd joined the Army with dreams of following in her grandfather's footsteps, a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd taught her to shoot and track on their family farm in Colorado. But 6 weeks into basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, she was failing spectacularly at everything from marksmanship to hand-to-hand combat. "Don't worry about Hayes," said Jenkins, her bunkmate, tossing her a towel. "He's extra hard on everyone." "Not like he is with me," Morgan replied, wiping mud from her face. "Did you hear what he called me today? A liability to the entire platoon, and he's not wrong." The truth stung worse than the scrapes on her knees. Morgan had grown up hearing her grandfather's stories of battlefield heroism, of split-second decisions that saved lives. She'd enlisted believing those same instincts ran in her blood. But here, surrounded by recruits who moved with confidence and precision, she was painfully average, or worse. "You just need more time," Jenkins offered, but her tone lacked conviction. Morgan stared at the ceiling, remembering this morning's weapons qualification. While others had hit their targets with reasonable accuracy, her shots had scattered wide. Drill Sergeant Hayes had stood behind her, his disappointment palpable. "Right, at this rate you couldn't hit a tank if you were standing inside it," he'd said, loud enough for the entire range to hear. The memory made her stomach clench. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot when she was 12. Old bolt-action rifles at cans lined up on fence posts. She'd been decent enough then. But here, with the pressure of 40 pairs of eyes on her back and Hayes's breath on her neck, she froze up every time. The barracks door slammed open, and Drill Sergeant Hayes's imposing figure filled the frame. Everyone jumped to attention. "Listen up, recruits! Tomorrow's exercise has changed. We've received intelligence that OPFOR has established positions throughout Training Area Bravo. Your mission is to navigate through hostile territory, locate and secure 3 objective points, then extract to the landing zone, all while evading or neutralizing enemy combatants." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morgan's heart sank. A field exercise against opposing forces was challenging enough for the top recruits. For someone struggling with basic marksmanship and tactical movement, it was a nightmare. "Right!" Hayes barked, causing her to flinch. "Front and center!" Morgan stepped forward, trying to keep her knees from shaking. "Since you've demonstrated such exceptional skills so far," Hayes said, sarcasm dripping from every word, "you'll be leading Fire Team Charlie tomorrow." The barracks fell silent. Putting the worst recruit in charge of a fire team during a complex exercise was unheard of. It wasn't just setting Morgan up for failure, it endangered her entire team. "Sir, with all due respect," Morgan began. "Did I ask for your opinion, Private?" Hayes cut her off. "Maybe responsibility will finally wake up whatever soldier might be hiding inside you. Or maybe it'll prove once and for all that you don't belong here." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because right now, Wright, you're tracking to be the first recruit I've recommended for discharge in 3 years." As Hayes left, Morgan felt her dream of military service crumbling. The other recruits avoided eye contact, not wanting to be associated with her inevitable failure. "He's trying to break you," Jenkins said later as they prepared their gear for tomorrow's exercise. "The question is, are you going to let him?" Morgan checked her training rifle mechanically, muscle memory taking over where confidence failed. "What choice do I have? I can't suddenly become a different person overnight." "Maybe you don't need to become someone different," Jenkins suggested. "Maybe you just need to remember who you really are." Morgan fell into an uneasy sleep that night, her grandfather's voice echoing in her dreams. The Army doesn't need perfect soldiers, Morgan. They need people who don't quit. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the Georgia pines. The recruits assembled in full gear, training rifles, tactical vests, helmets, and enough water to last through the grueling day ahead. The exercise would take place across 5 square miles of dense forest, rolling hills, and swampy lowlands. Each fire team has different objective points, Hayes explained, unfolding a map. You'll be graded on time, tactical proficiency, and objective completion. OPFER has been instructed not to make this easy for you. Morgan studied her team: Jenkins, Rodriguez, and Thompson. All solid recruits who deserved better than having their success jeopardized by her leadership. "I'm sorry you got stuck with me," she told them quietly as Hayes briefed the other team leaders. Rodriguez shrugged. "Just don't get us captured in the first 10 minutes, and we're already exceeding expectations." The teams deployed at staggered intervals. Morgan's was third to depart, moving into the misty forest with all the enthusiasm of prisoners approaching the gallows. "What's your plan, Wright?" Thompson asked once they were well away from the staging area. Morgan hesitated. Every instinct told her she wasn't qualified to make decisions that affected others. But, as team leader, indecision was the worst choice of all. "Our first objective is here," she said, pointing to a small clearing marked on their map. "It's about 2 clicks northeast. We should move in a staggered column, maintain visual contact, and use hand signals when possible." It was textbook. Nothing creative or insightful, just repeating what they'd been taught. But her team nodded and fell into formation without complaint. The first hour passed without incident. The forest was eerily silent, except for their boots on the pine-strewn ground and the occasional distant bird call. Morgan began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps the OPFOR would focus on more competent teams first. That hope died when Rodriguez raised his fist, the signal to stop. Up ahead, barely visible through the trees, 2 OPFOR soldiers were establishing an ambush position along their route. Morgan froze. Everything she'd learned about reacting to contact seemed to evaporate from her mind. She should give orders, make a decision, but panic closed her throat. Then something unexpected happened. Without conscious thought, Morgan found herself motioning to her team, flank left, weapons ready. She pointed to Jenkins and herself, then to a rocky outcropping that would provide cover fire. She directed Rodriguez and Thompson to circle wide around the enemy's position. Her team looked surprised, but moved immediately to execute her silent commands. Morgan and Jenkins crawled to the outcropping, using the terrain to mask their movement, just as her grandfather had taught her when stalking deer. When they were in position, Morgan gave the signal. Jenkins opened fire with her training rifle, the sharp crack of blanks shattering the forest quiet. The OPFOR soldiers ducked for cover, focusing on the visible threat, exactly as Morgan had anticipated. This allowed Rodriguez and Thompson to approach undetected from behind. Within 30 seconds, both OPFOR soldiers had been eliminated with simulation rounds, their armbands removed to signal their defeat. "Holy shit, Wright," Thompson whispered when they regrouped. "Where did that come from?" Morgan blinked, equally surprised by her own actions. "I don't know. It just happened." For the first time since basic training began, Morgan felt a flicker of confidence. The movement through the forest, the silent communication, the tactical thinking, it had all come naturally once the pressure was real, not performative. They secured their first objective point an hour later, finding the hidden supply cache and marking it as instructed. 2 more objectives remained, with increasing distance and difficulty between them. The team moved with renewed energy, Morgan's unexpected competence inspiring confidence. They evaded another OPFOR patrol by using a shallow creek to mask their sounds and scent, a trick Morgan's grandfather had taught her for tracking. "You've done this before," Jenkins observed as they paused to check their map. Morgan shook her head. "Just hunting with my grandfather. Nothing like this." "Seems pretty similar to me," Rodriguez said. "You're reading the terrain, predicting movement patterns, using cover effectively." "That's exactly what we're supposed to be doing." By midday, they'd secured their second objective and were making good time toward the third. Morgan felt like a different person than the recruit who had stumbled through the barracks door yesterday. Here in the forest, away from the drill sergeant's scrutinizing gaze and the pressure of the firing range, something dormant had awakened in her. Their luck changed as they approached the final objective. The terrain opened into a clearing with minimal cover, and their target, a small communication station, was visibly guarded by 4 OPFOR soldiers. "We're outnumbered," Thompson whispered as they surveyed the situation from the tree line. Morgan studied the clearing, her mind racing through options. A frontal assault would fail. They couldn't circle around without being spotted. Waiting for darkness wasn't an option with the exercise time frame. Then she noticed something. The regular patrol pattern of the guards, the 30-second window when the western approach was unwatched. It was subtle, the kind of detail her grandfather would point out when teaching her to observe animal behavior. "We can do this," Morgan said, outlining her plan. It was risky, relying on perfect timing and execution, but her team listened with growing respect. The plan worked flawlessly until it didn't. 3 of them made it to the communications station undetected, neutralizing 2 guards in quick succession. But as Thompson moved to secure the objective, an unexpected 5th OPFOR soldier emerged from inside the station. "Contact!" Rodriguez shouted as training rounds cracked through the air. What happened next occurred so quickly that Morgan would only piece it together later from her team's accounts. The 5th OPFOR soldier, actually an assistant drill instructor playing the role of an enemy officer, pulled something from his belt and tossed it into their midst. "Training grenade!" Jenkins yelled, diving for cover. But it wasn't a training grenade. Instead of the harmless simulators used in exercises, a live flashbang had somehow made it into the training equipment. Morgan recognized the difference immediately. The wrong weight, the wrong safety lever. Her grandfather had shown her various tactical devices during her visits to his veteran friends. "Real flashbang!" she shouted, lunging forward. She snatched the device and hurled it away from the group, into an empty section of the clearing. The flashbang detonated with a blinding light and deafening concussion that would have caused serious injuries had it gone off in their midst. In the disorienting aftermath, training protocol dissolved. The assistant drill instructor stared at Morgan in shock, while Rodriguez radioed for a safety timeout. "How did you know?" the instructor demanded when the ringing in their ears had subsided. "Weight was wrong. Safety lever too," Morgan explained, still running on adrenaline. "My grandfather showed me the difference." Word of the incident spread quickly through command channels. By the time Morgan's team had been escorted back to base, Drill Sergeant Hayes was waiting with the battalion commander and a safety officer. The investigation was swift and thorough. The live flashbang had been mistakenly included in the training equipment during an inventory transfer. Had it detonated within the team's position, multiple recruits would have suffered hearing damage and potential burns. "Private Wright," the battalion commander said when the preliminary findings were complete, "your quick action prevented serious injuries today. That kind of situational awareness cannot be taught, only recognized and refined." Morgan stood at rigid attention, still processing that her instincts had been correct. "Furthermore," the commander continued, "I understand from your team's report that your leadership during the exercise was exemplary. 3 objectives secured, 5 OPFOR neutralized, 0 team casualties until the equipment malfunction." Hayes shifted uncomfortably beside the commander. "Drill Sergeant Hayes, you have anything to add?" the commander asked. Hayes cleared his throat. "Private Wright has demonstrated unexpected aptitude in field conditions. Her performance today was commendable." It wasn't an apology, but from Hayes it might as well have been. That evening, as the recruits prepared for lights out, an unusual silence fell over the barracks when Hayes entered. He walked directly to Morgan's bunk. "Wright, walk with me," he ordered. Outside, the Georgia night was thick with humidity and chirping insects. Hayes led her to the edge of the parade ground before stopping. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally, his usual barking tone replaced with something more measured. "I've been particularly hard on you." "Yes, Drill Sergeant," Morgan agreed, unable to hide the edge in her voice. "There's a reason." Hayes looked out across the darkened field. "Your grandfather, Robert Wright, Vietnam, Special Forces?" Morgan stiffened in surprise. "You knew my grandfather?" "He saved my father's life at Khe Sanh. Your grandfather was legendary for his fieldcraft and instinctive tactical thinking. When I saw your name on my roster, I looked into your background." Morgan struggled to process this revelation. "So you've been targeting me because of who my grandfather was?" "I've been pushing you because of who you are," Hayes corrected. "Your test scores, your background. Everything suggested you had the same natural abilities, but you weren't showing them in training. You were overthinking, second-guessing yourself, trying to be a perfect soldier instead of trusting your instincts. So you decided to break me down completely? Morgan asked, anger bubbling up. Tell me I'm the worst recruit you've ever seen? Hayes nodded slowly. Sometimes the only way to find out what someone's really made of is to push them to their breaking point. Today, when it actually mattered, when lives were potentially at risk, you didn't hesitate. You led. You adapted. You relied on instincts that can't be taught in any training manual. Morgan wanted to hold on to her anger, but understanding was beginning to dawn. The team assignment wasn't punishment, it was a test. A calculated risk, Hayes admitted, one that paid off better than I expected. He turned to face her directly. Your grandfather used to say that some soldiers are born in classrooms, but the best are born in chaos. You proved him right today. Morgan stood in silence, absorbing his words. For 6 weeks, she'd believed herself a failure, measuring herself against artificial standards that didn't account for the kind of intuitive skill her grandfather had tried to nurture in her. So what happens now, drill sergeant? Now, Hayes said, the familiar steel returning to his voice. You stop hiding what you're capable of. You've got 8 more weeks to become the soldier your grandfather knew you could be. And trust me, Wright, I'm going to make sure you don't waste a single day of it. As they walked back to the barracks, Morgan felt something shift inside her, a newfound alignment between the person she'd been raised to be and the soldier she was becoming. The worst recruit in the platoon had found her footing at last, not by changing who she was, but by finally embracing it. The morning after the flashbang incident, the barracks buzzed with whispers. Recruits stole glances at Morgan as she made her bunk with precise hospital corners. Overnight, she had transformed from Wright the washout to something entirely different, a recruit who had saved her team from serious injury and impressed the battalion commander. Morgan felt the change too, but not in the way others might expect. The confidence flowing through her veins wasn't pride or satisfaction. It was recognition of herself, of abilities that had always been there, dormant beneath layers of self-doubt and overthinking. Formation in 5. A voice called from the door, and recruits scrambled to finish their morning routines. Outside, the Georgia sun was already fierce despite the early hour. Platoons assembled on the parade ground, rows of green uniforms, standing at rigid attention as drill sergeants prowled between them. Hayes stopped in front of Morgan's fire team, his face unreadable. Today we begin advanced tactical training, he announced to the entire company. Some of you might think you're ready. Most of you are not. His eyes lingered briefly on Morgan. Yesterday's field exercise revealed strengths and weaknesses in each of you. Today we build on those lessons. The morning consisted of weapons drills more complex than anything they'd attempted before. Malfunction clearance under stress, transition to secondary weapons, firing from compromised positions. To Morgan's surprise, her hands moved with newfound steadiness. Where she had once tensed under Hayes' scrutiny, she now focused only on the task, letting muscle memory guide her. Better right, Hayes commented as she completed a rapid magazine change without looking at her weapon. Still room for improvement. Coming from Hayes, it was practically a glowing endorsement. At lunch, Morgan sat with her fire team, who had adopted a protective camaraderie toward her after yesterday's events. Word is, you're being scouted, Rodriguez said around a mouthful of mashed potatoes. Morgan frowned. Scouted? By who? Special Training Division, Thompson replied, lowering his voice. Jenkins overheard Hayes talking to Captain Martinez about your natural aptitude. Jenkins nodded confirmation. They're watching you now? Morgan dismissed the rumors with a shake of her head. One good day didn't erase 6 weeks of struggling through basic training. Besides, she wasn't interested in special anything. She just wanted to earn her place here, to become the soldier her grandfather believed she could be. After lunch, the company was divided into specialized training groups. Morgan expected to join the marksmanship remediation as usual, but Hayes directed her toward a different area where a small group was gathering around an unfamiliar officer. Captain Martinez, Hayes said by way of introduction. This is Private Wright. The captain was a compact woman with intelligent eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. She studied Morgan with a scrutiny that felt different from Hayes' critical glare, more analytical, like she was solving a puzzle. I've heard interesting things about you, Private, Martinez said. Today you'll be joining my tactical response group. Morgan glanced at Hayes, who simply nodded. The tactical response group consisted of 8 recruits selected from different platoons, all of whom shared a similar confusion about their selection. Captain Martinez led them to a section of the training ground Morgan had never visited before, a complex urban combat simulator with multi-story buildings, vehicles, and realistic street layouts. The modern battlefield isn't just forests and fields, Martinez explained. Often it's densely populated urban environments where threats and civilians intermingle, where conventional tactics fail and where instinct becomes as important as training. She divided them into pairs. Morgan was teamed with a lanky recruit named Diaz from another platoon. Each pair will navigate the environment with specific mission parameters, Martinez continued. You'll face unexpected scenarios requiring immediate decisions. There are no correct answers, only outcomes and consequences. The exercise began immediately. Morgan and Diaz entered the simulator through an alleyway entrance, armed with training rifles loaded with simulation rounds. Their mission was simple on paper: locate and extract a high-value intelligence asset hiding somewhere in the complex. In practice, it was chaos by design. Around every corner, they encountered situations requiring split-second judgment, distinguishing between hostile and civilian role players, identifying potential traps, choosing between multiple routes with limited intelligence. Morgan found herself leading, not by conscious decision but by instinct. When they encountered a room with potential hostiles, she signaled Diaz to cover while she assessed the threats. When they faced a choice between a direct route and a longer but more concealed approach, she instinctively chose the latter. "You've done this before," Diaz whispered as they pressed against a wall, listening for movement beyond. "Never," Morgan replied, but it felt familiar somehow. The heightened awareness, the rapid assessment of threats and opportunities, the flow of decision-making untainted by doubt. It reminded her of tracking with her grandfather in the Colorado mountains, where hesitation meant lost prey and poor decisions meant dangerous terrain. They located their asset, an instructor playing the role of an informant, in the upper floor of a partially collapsed building. As they approached, automatic fire from simulation weapons erupted from a flanking position. "Ambush!" Diaz shouted, diving for cover that wasn't there. Morgan moved without thinking, grabbing Diaz by his tactical vest and pulling him behind a concrete pillar as rounds impacted where he'd been standing. She returned fire precisely, forcing the ambushers to retreat, then gestured to the asset. "This way," she directed, identifying a route that avoided the main avenues of approach. "They'll expect us to fall back to the main entrance. We go through the service corridor instead." The extraction succeeded with no casualties, a result Captain Martinez later informed them only 2 pairs had achieved in the past 6 months of running the exercise. "How did you know about the service corridor?" Martinez asked Morgan afterward. "It's not visible from the main approach." Morgan struggled to explain. "I just felt it should be there, based on the building layout. Old buildings like that usually have secondary maintenance access." Martinez exchanged a look with Hayes, who had appeared to observe the debriefing. "Spatial intelligence," she noted, "combined with intuitive tactical reasoning." For the rest of the afternoon, Morgan moved through increasingly complex scenarios, sometimes with Diaz, sometimes alone. Each time, she found that when she stopped overthinking, when she allowed her instincts to guide her, solutions presented themselves naturally. By day's end, Morgan was exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, training felt less like a constant struggle against her own inadequacy, and more like a process of uncovering abilities that had always existed within her. As the recruits prepared to return to the barracks, Captain Martinez pulled Morgan aside. "I've been watching you closely today, Private Wright," she said. "Your performance metrics are unusual." Morgan tensed, immediately expecting criticism. "In structured environments, firing ranges, obstacle courses, drill, you perform below average," Martinez continued. "But in dynamic, unpredictable scenarios requiring adaptive thinking, you perform in the top percentile. It's an uncommon profile." "Is that good, ma'am?" Morgan asked. Martinez smiled slightly. "The Army needs different types of soldiers, right? Some excel at executing established protocols perfectly. Others, a much smaller group, excel at adapting when those protocols fail. Your grandfather was famously in the latter category." Morgan's eyes widened. "You knew my grandfather too?" "I studied his field operations at command school," Martinez clarified. Robert Wright was a case study in adaptive combat leadership. His unit survived situations that should have been unsurvivable because of his ability to improvise effective solutions when standard approaches failed. The comparison to her grandfather both honored and terrified Morgan. She'd grown up in the shadow of his legacy, never imagining she could measure up to it. "With your permission," Martinez continued, "I'd like to recommend you for specialized training following your basic qualification. There's a program designed specifically for soldiers with your aptitude profile." "What kind of program?" Morgan asked cautiously. "Tactical adaptation and response training. Small units designed to operate in high-variability environments where standard operating procedures may be insufficient. It's selective and entirely voluntary." Morgan hesitated. Yesterday, she'd been on the verge of being discharged as unsuitable for military service. Today, a captain was discussing specialized training paths. The whiplash was disorienting. "I need to complete basic training first," Morgan said finally. Martinez nodded. "Of course. But I want you to know that the path is there, should you choose to take it." When Morgan returned to the barracks that evening, she found Hayes waiting. "Walk with me, Wright," he ordered, just as he had the night before. They made their way to the edge of the training grounds, where the facility's lights cast long shadows across the grass. "Captain Martinez is impressed with you," Hayes said without preamble. "I'm still trying to understand what happened today," Morgan admitted. "Everything just flowed." Hayes nodded. "That's because you stopped fighting yourself. For weeks, I've watched you try to be the perfect textbook soldier, following every procedure exactly as written, overthinking every step of every task. But that's never been your strength." He picked up a stick and drew in the dirt, a simple tactical scenario with X's and O's representing units and obstacles. "Most recruits, I train them to follow the book," he said, drawing a straight line from start to objective. "But a very few, I have to train differently." He erased his straight line and drew a winding path that navigated the obstacles in ways Morgan immediately recognized as more effective if less conventional. "Your grandfather was like that," Hayes continued. "Couldn't drill worth a damn. His uniform was always slightly off regulation, but put him in an impossible situation, and he'd find the one path through it that no one else could see." Morgan stared at the diagram. "That's why you pushed me so hard?" "To find out if I was like him." "To find out who you are," Hayes corrected. "The Army doesn't need another Robert Wright. We need Morgan Wright, whoever that turns out to be." The next morning, training intensified for everyone. With only 6 weeks until graduation, the pressure to qualify on all basic skills mounted daily. Morgan still struggled with conventional drills, but she no longer allowed those struggles to define her. Instead, she began helping other recruits see alternatives when standard approaches weren't working for them. When Jenkins couldn't master the rhythm of clearing a jammed weapon under time pressure, Morgan suggested visualizing it as a dance rather than a procedure. When Thompson kept missing targets at distance, she showed him how to read wind effects by watching grass movement instead of calculating adjustments. "You're becoming a leader," Jenkins observed one evening as they cleaned their rifles. "Not the kind they teach in manuals, but the kind people actually want to follow." Morgan hadn't thought of it that way. She'd simply been sharing what worked for her, translating her instinctive understanding into terms others could apply. 3 weeks later, the company faced its most demanding test yet, a 72-hour field exercise combining all elements of their training. Each platoon would navigate through hostile territory to multiple objectives, facing OPFOR units using advanced tactics and operating with minimal support or guidance. The night before deployment, Hayes gathered Morgan's platoon. "Tomorrow we'll test everything you've learned," he said, his voice grave. "But more importantly, it will test what you do when what you've learned isn't enough." His eyes found Morgan's. "Right, you'll be assistant squad leader for 2nd Squad." The assignment was significant. Not a full leadership role, but a position of genuine responsibility. Morgan accepted it with a silent nod. That night, as others slept, Morgan reviewed their mission parameters. 2nd Squad's objectives were particularly challenging, a series of points in difficult terrain with high probabilities of contact with OPFOR. On paper, it looked nearly impossible to complete all objectives within the allowed time frame. Morgan traced the conventional approach on her map, then set it aside and closed her eyes. She visualized the terrain from the aerial photos they'd been shown. imagining how she would move through it if she were tracking or hunting. Alternative paths began to form in her mind, not easier ones, but more efficient routes that used the land's natural features to advantage. Dawn broke cold and misty as the platoons deployed into the training area. Morgan's squad moved out under the leadership of Corporal Foster, an experienced NCO who had been observing her progress with interest. "Right," Foster said once they were underway. "You've studied the terrain. What's your assessment?" It was a test, a leader asking a subordinate for input while maintaining command authority. Morgan respected the approach. "The standard route takes us through these 3 valleys," she said, indicating the map. "Heavy cover, but OPFOR will expect us there. They'll have prepared positions in interlocking fields of fire." Foster nodded. "Alternatives?" Morgan pointed to a ridgeline that paralleled their route. "Higher exposure but better visibility. We can move faster, spot ambushes before we're committed, and drop into the valleys only when necessary to reach objectives." Foster studied her face, then the map. "Higher ground means harder climbing. The squad's already carrying maximum weight." "Yes, sir," Morgan acknowledged. "It's a trade-off. More physical demand, but less combat risk." Foster considered for a moment longer. "We'll try your approach for the first leg. If it proves effective, we'll continue." The ridge route was brutal. Every member of the squad felt the burn of ascending steep terrain with full combat loads, but Morgan's assessment proved accurate. From the heights, they spotted 2 OPFOR ambush positions that would have decimated them had they taken the valley route. By midday, they had secured their first objective well ahead of schedule. Foster called Morgan forward as they prepared to move toward their second target. "Your route worked," he said simply. "What's next?" Thus began a pattern that would define the remainder of the exercise. Morgan's intuitive understanding of terrain and tactical movement guided their approach, while Foster's experience provided the leadership framework that translated her insights into effective squad action. They completed their second objective by nightfall, a full 12 hours ahead of the expected timeline. As they established a defensive position for the night, Foster received updated intelligence via their field radio. "Change of plans," he informed the squad. "3rd Platoon has suffered heavy simulated casualties and failed to secure their second objective. We're being redirected to complete their mission before proceeding to our final target." The news sent a ripple of concern through the squad. Taking on another unit's objective while still completing their own would stretch their resources to the breaking point. "Can we request additional support?" someone asked. Foster shook his head. "Negative. This exercise is specifically designed to test our ability to adapt to changing circumstances with existing resources." All eyes turned to Morgan, who was already studying the map with her red lens flashlight. "3rd Platoon's objective is here," she said, indicating a point nearly 5 kilometers from their current position. "It's a communications array on exposed high ground. They failed because there's only one obvious approach route, and OPFOR has it locked down with crew-served weapons." "So how do we succeed where they failed?" Foster asked. Morgan was quiet for a long moment, seeing the terrain in her mind's eye. Then she pointed to a feature on the map that everyone else had dismissed, a steep ravine that ran behind the OPFOR position. "It's not marked as passable," Foster noted. "It's not passable for a full platoon moving in standard formation," Morgan agreed. "But a small team moving in single file could navigate it. It would put us directly behind the OPFOR position." Foster studied the ravine's contours. "That's a near vertical ascent at the end." "Yes, sir. We'd need climbing equipment we don't have." Morgan paused, then added, "unless we improvise it." A plan took shape. Daring, unorthodox, but potentially effective. They would split the squad, with a small element led by Morgan attempting the ravine approach, while Foster led the remainder in a diversionary action along the main route. The night passed in preparation. Morgan selected 3 squad members with the best combination of climbing experience and combat skills for her team. They fashioned improvised climbing aids from equipment they carried. Bootlaces became safety lines. Rifle slings transformed into harnesses. Entrenching tools served as makeshift pittons. Before dawn, they moved out. Foster's element initiated contact with the OPFOR position from the front. Not a full assault, but enough to fix their attention. Meanwhile, Morgan led her team into the ravine. The passage was worse than it had appeared on the map. Loose scree threatened to trigger small landslides with every step. The ravine narrowed in places to barely shoulder width, forcing them to remove their packs and push them ahead. The final ascent was nearly vertical, requiring them to create a human ladder, with each soldier securing positions for those who followed. But they made it. As the sun crested the horizon, Morgan's team emerged silently behind the Op-4 position. 4 enemy combatants manned a heavy machine gun nest, their attention focused entirely on Foster's diversionary activity below. The simulation rounds from Morgan's team found their marks before the Op-4 soldiers could react. The position fell without a single casualty among the squad. When they secured the communications array, 3rd Platoon's failed objective, Morgan found Captain Martinez waiting with the exercise controllers. "Impressive problem-solving, Private Wright," Martinez said, making notes on her tablet. "The ravine approach wasn't considered viable in our planning scenarios." "The terrain is only impossible if you try to move through it conventionally," Morgan replied. Martinez's eyes sparked with interest. That principle applies to more than just physical terrain. By the time Morgan's squad completed their 3rd and final objective, their originally assigned target, they had set a new record for the exercise. Not only had they accomplished their mission plus the additional objective, but they had done so with 0 simulated casualties. When they returned to base, exhausted but triumphant, they found the battalion commander waiting alongside Hayes and Martinez. "Second Squad," the commander addressed them. "Your performance during this exercise has been exceptional. You adapted to changing circumstances, improvised solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems, and accomplished your objectives with minimal resources. These are the qualities that define the finest soldiers in our army." His eyes found Morgan. "Some of you have demonstrated particular aptitude for unconventional problem-solving. That aptitude will be recognized and developed as you progress in your military careers." Later, as the squad celebrated their success with the first hot meal they'd had in 3 days, Foster approached Morgan. "Right," he said, "I've been a squad leader for 3 years. Led dozens of exercises like this one. Never seen anyone read terrain and tactical situations the way you do." Morgan shrugged uncomfortably. "I just see patterns, I guess." Foster shook his head. "It's more than that. You see possibilities where others see obstacles." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever specialized path Captain Martinez is steering you toward, take it. The Army needs soldiers who can think the way you do." That night, Hayes found Morgan sitting alone outside the barracks, watching the stars. "Your grandfather used to do that," he said, settling beside her. "Said the stars helped him think." Morgan smiled slightly. "He taught me the constellations when I was little. Said any soldier worth their salt should be able to navigate by them." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you might be trying to live up to his legacy. That's a weight that crushes most people." "I was," Morgan admitted. "My whole life, I've heard stories about Robert Wright, the legendary soldier. I enlisted thinking I had to become him somehow." "And now?" Morgan considered the question carefully. "Now I understand that his legacy isn't about what he did, it's about how he thought, how he saw the world." She looked back at the stars. "I don't need to become my grandfather. I just need to trust the parts of me that are like him, while becoming fully myself." Hayes nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "That, Private Wright, might be the most important lesson you'll learn here." As basic training entered its final weeks, Morgan no longer struggled with being the worst recruit in the platoon. She had found her place, not as the perfect soldier by conventional metrics, but as a unique asset with capabilities the Army desperately needed. The drill sergeant who had once called her the worst recruit he'd seen in 15 years now watched with quiet pride as she helped others find their own paths to success. The transformation wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about becoming more fully who she had always been. The final week of basic training brought with it the culminating event, a 3-day combat simulation that would determine which recruits had truly transformed from civilians into soldiers. Unlike previous exercises, this one would pit the entire company against a reinforced Op-4 unit using enhanced training equipment, tactical vehicles, and advanced combat scenarios. "This isn't just another field exercise," Hayes announced during the pre-mission briefing. "This is as close to actual combat as training gets. The Op-4 unit consists of experienced soldiers specifically trained to test your limits. They know every trick, every standard response, and they will exploit any weakness they find." Morgan sat with her squad, absorbing the intelligence briefing with a focus that had become her trademark. Maps of the sprawling training area covered the walls. 50 square kilometers of varied terrain with mock villages, urban centers, and defensive positions scattered throughout. Their mission was complex. Secure 3 critical infrastructure points, establish a forward operating base, and hold it against determined counterattacks. Second Squad. Foster addressed them after the general briefing. We've been assigned point reconnaissance. We move ahead of the main element to identify enemy positions and secure the initial landing zone. It was the most dangerous assignment, moving small and light through potentially hostile territory with minimal support. But it also played perfectly to their demonstrated strengths in previous exercises. Wright, Foster continued, you'll be our primary navigator and terrain specialist. Rodriguez, Thompson, you're our comms team. Jenkins, you're my second. The rest of you, standard fire team configuration. As they prepared their equipment, Jenkins sidled up to Morgan. Point recon, she said quietly. Guess who requested that assignment specifically? Morgan looked up from checking her kit. Hayes? Captain Martinez. Word is she wants to see how you perform in a leadership role without actually putting you in charge. Kind of a final exam. Morgan absorbed this information with mixed emotions. The attention from officers like Martinez was flattering, but also created pressure. Ever since the flashbang incident, she'd felt increasing expectations from all sides. I'm just trying to do my part, she said finally. Jenkins laughed. Your part has already changed the way half the company approaches tactical problems. Don't think people haven't noticed. Before Morgan could respond, Foster called them for final equipment inspection. Whatever test Martinez had designed for her would have to be faced head-on. The mission began before dawn the next day. Second Squad deployed via helicopter insertion 10 kilometers ahead of the main force, touching down in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. The moment their boots hit the ground, they moved out in a staggered formation that had become second nature over weeks of training together. Morgan took point, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead while her mind processed the topographical map she'd memorized. Unlike previous exercises, this one featured an OPFOR that used unpredictable adaptive tactics, much closer to what they might face in actual combat zones. 2 hours into their movement, Morgan raised her fist, the signal to halt. The squad froze instantly, each member assuming defensive posture while scanning their sectors. Morgan motioned Foster forward and pointed to a barely visible disturbance in the forest floor ahead, drag marks partially concealed by scattered leaves. Trap? Foster whispered. Morgan nodded, indicating with hand signals that someone had recently prepared a position ahead of them, likely an ambush site or observation post. Instead of retreating or trying to push through, Morgan suggested a third option: elevate their position to gain tactical advantage. The squad moved into the trees, using techniques they'd developed during previous exercises to climb silently to elevated positions that offered both concealment and superior fields of fire. Within minutes, their patience was rewarded. 2 OPFOR scouts appeared, checking what turned out to be a well-disguised surveillance position. From their elevated vantage point, Second Squad observed without being detected. Rather than engaging and potentially alerting the main OPFOR element to their presence, they carefully documented the enemy position and continued their mission along an adjusted route. That was good work, Foster told Morgan once they were safely beyond the danger zone. Most squads would have either walked into the trap or engaged unnecessarily. Morgan shrugged. Sometimes the best action is patient observation. My grandfather called it, letting the enemy reveal their hand while keeping yours hidden. By midday, they had located and documented 3 OPFOR positions without being detected themselves, intelligence that would prove invaluable to the main force. But their primary objective, securing the initial landing zone, still lay ahead. According to their intelligence briefing, the landing zone was an open field adjacent to a small mock village. Satellite imagery had shown minimal enemy presence, but as they approached, Morgan sensed something wrong. It feels too quiet, she told Foster as they established an observation position overlooking the area. No movement, no patrols, nothing. Foster studied the village through his binoculars. Could be unoccupied. Or it could be a trap, Morgan replied. The landing zone is too perfect. Flat, open, easily defensible. If I were OPFOR, I'd make it look abandoned, then hit the main force during landing when they're most vulnerable. Foster considered this. We need to verify before we report back. Morgan proposed a solution that had become characteristic of her approach, unconventional but effective. Instead of conducting a standard reconnaissance patrol through the village, they would create a diversion that might reveal any hidden OPFOR positions without exposing themselves. Using techniques they'd perfected in previous exercises, they constructed several improvised sound devices from their equipment, canteens rigged to create delayed noises, empty magazines set to fall and clatter. They positioned these devices around the perimeter of the village, set to activate at staggered intervals. From their concealed observation post, they watched and waited. The first sound device activated, a metallic clatter that echoed through the quiet village. Within seconds, the abandoned buildings erupted with activity. OPFOR soldiers emerged from hidden positions, moving in disciplined fire teams toward the source of the noise. "I count 3 squads," Foster whispered. "Heavily armed, with crew-served weapons in the church tower and that 2-story building." Morgan nodded, mapping their positions mentally. "They've prepared a crossfire zone covering the entire landing area. If our forces landed here, they'd be caught in interlocking fields of fire from multiple directions." The squad documented everything: force composition, weapons positions, patrol patterns, before withdrawing to report their findings. Their intelligence changed the entire operational plan. Instead of landing in the compromised zone, the main force established an alternate landing site based on Morgan's recommendation, a more challenging terrain feature, but one free of enemy presence. When the company commander received their report, he immediately called Hayes and Martinez to review the intelligence. "Second squad has potentially saved dozens of simulated casualties," the commander said, studying the detailed sketches and notes Morgan had prepared. This ambush was sophisticated enough that it might have gone undetected in a standard reconnaissance. Martinez caught Morgan's eye and nodded slightly, an acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The operation proceeded with second squad, now assigned to a new role: forward security for the command element as they established the alternate base of operations. It was a position of trust, responsible for protecting the leadership that coordinated the entire company's actions. As night fell on the first day, Morgan found herself pulling guard duty alongside Rodriguez. The main force had successfully landed at the alternate site and was establishing defensive positions for the night phase of the exercise. "Heard something interesting from the comms tent," Rodriguez said quietly as they scanned the perimeter. "OPFOR commander is apparently some kind of tactical genius they brought in specifically for this exercise. West Point instructor, combat veteran, the works. Word is he specifically requested a chance to test the company that produced, the recruit who thinks outside the box." Morgan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've got a reputation that's spread beyond this company, right? The flashbang incident, the ravine approach, those stories travel. And now this OPFOR commander wants to see if you're really as adaptive as they say." The information was unsettling. Morgan had never sought attention. She'd simply been trying to survive basic training and find her place. The idea that she had become some kind of tactical challenge for an experienced officer was both flattering and terrifying. "Well," she said finally, "I guess we'll see how adaptive we really are." They didn't have to wait long for the answer. Shortly after midnight, OPFOR launched their first attack, a multi-directional assault designed to test the company's night defense procedures. Standard doctrine called for fixed defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire, but Morgan had suggested an alternative approach that Foster and eventually Hayes had endorsed. Instead of establishing a static perimeter, Second Squad had created a defense in-depth strategy with mobile reaction teams. When OPFOR breached the outer perimeter at multiple points, they didn't encounter the fixed resistance they expected. Instead, they found themselves pursued by small, highly mobile fire teams that appeared and disappeared in the darkness, striking from unexpected angles. Morgan led one of these teams, using the nighttime terrain as an ally rather than an obstacle. Her grandfather had taught her to move in darkness by feeling the ground with her feet to identify shapes by their outlines against the night sky. Now those lessons served her team as they outmaneuvered OPFOR elements twice their size. They're executing standard night warfare doctrine, Morgan observed as they regrouped after disrupting an OPFOR flanking attempt. Moving along predictable avenues of approach, maintaining fixed distances between elements. Which means they're vulnerable to unconventional responses, Jenkins concluded. By dawn, the OPFOR attack had been repelled with minimal casualties among the company. The victory boosted morale, but Morgan remained concerned. Their adversary had tested their defenses in a fairly conventional way, almost as if probing for information, rather than committing to a serious assault. Her suspicions were confirmed during the morning briefing. Intelligence reports indicated OPFOR was regrouping for a major push later that day, likely with armored vehicle support and possibly simulated air assets. "They're adapting to our approach," Morgan told Foster as they prepared for the coming attack. "Last night was reconnaissance by fire. They wanted to see how we'd respond to standard tactics." Foster nodded grimly. "Which means today they'll try something unexpected." "Exactly. And we need to be ready with our own surprises." The OPFOR attack came at midday, a massive coordinated assault that struck from multiple directions simultaneously. Tactical vehicles supported by simulated airstrikes targeted the company's command and control nodes with precision. It was sophisticated, adaptive, and overwhelmingly powerful. But Second Squad was ready. Based on Morgan's analysis of the previous night's engagement, they had prepared contingencies for various attack vectors. When OPFOR's main thrust came directly toward the command post they were defending, Morgan's team executed a pre-planned response. Instead of attempting to repel the superior force directly, they initiated a fighting withdrawal that appeared to be a retreat but was actually a carefully choreographed movement to lead the attackers into a prepared kill zone. Other squads, briefed on the strategy, provided overlapping fields of fire that caught the OPFOR element in a devastating crossfire. The OPFOR commander, recognizing the trap too late, attempted to withdraw his forces, only to find that Morgan had anticipated this response as well. Secondary teams had circled behind during the initial engagement, cutting off the most obvious retreat routes. The resulting battle ended with the OPFOR element entirely neutralized according to the exercise parameters. When the company commander called a tactical pause to reset the simulation, Martinez sought out Morgan's position. "That was impressive tactical foresight, Private," the captain said, surveying the aftermath of the engagement. "The OPFOR commander is reportedly quite frustrated with your ability to anticipate his moves." Morgan felt a surge of pride tempered by humility. "It wasn't just me, ma'am. The entire squad contributed to the planning, and the other units executed perfectly." Martinez nodded. "True leadership isn't about claiming credit. It's about enabling others to succeed as part of a coordinated effort." She paused, studying Morgan with those analytical eyes. "The OPFOR commander has requested a meeting with the architect of that trap. I told him that would be you." "Me, ma'am? But I'm just a private." "A private who just outmaneuvered a West Point tactical instructor." Martinez's expression remained serious. "This isn't standard protocol, but nothing about your progression has been standard. The meeting is scheduled for 1800 hours at the command post. I'll be present as your officer representative." As Martinez departed, Morgan tried to process what had just happened. Meeting with the OPFOR commander mid-exercise was unprecedented. Was it recognition? Or was it another test? At 1800 hours, Morgan reported to the command post as instructed. Martinez was waiting outside, along with Hayes, who looked uncharacteristically concerned. "Remember, Wright," Hayes said quietly, "regardless of rank or experience, you've earned the right to be in this conversation. Your tactical thinking has proven itself in practical application." Inside the command tent, a gray-haired colonel sat studying a map of the battlefield. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face creasing into an expression Morgan couldn't quite read. "So you're Private Wright," he said, standing to his full, imposing height. "Yes, sir," Morgan replied, standing at rigid attention. "At ease, Private. I'm Colonel Blackwood, commander of the OPFOR element for this exercise." He gestured to the map. "I understand you're responsible for several of the tactical innovations that have caused my forces significant challenges over the past 24 hours. I've contributed to our squad's planning efforts, sir," Morgan said cautiously. Blackwood studied her with piercing eyes. "Contributed? Interesting choice of words. According to my intelligence officers, you're the primary architect of both the reconnaissance deception that compromised our ambush site and the tactical withdrawal that trapped my assault element this afternoon." Morgan remained silent, unsure how to respond without seeming either arrogant or falsely modest. "Do you know why I requested this meeting, Private Wright?" Blackwood asked. "No, sir." Because in 30 years of military service, including combat deployments to 5 different theaters, I've rarely encountered the type of adaptive thinking you've demonstrated in this exercise. He tapped the map where Morgan's trap had been sprung. This maneuver here, it shouldn't have worked. My forces had superior numbers, better equipment, and experienced leadership, yet you anticipated not just our initial approach, but our contingency response. Thank you, sir, Morgan said, still uncertain where this was leading. I'm not complimenting you, Private. I'm trying to understand you. Blackwood fixed her with that penetrating gaze. Where did you learn to think this way? The question caught Morgan off guard. She glanced at Martinez, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. My grandfather, sir. Robert Wright. He served in Vietnam, with Special Forces. He taught me to see terrain differently, to think about how people move through spaces, to anticipate rather than react. Blackwood's expression shifted subtly. Robert Wright. I should have made the connection from your name. He turned to Hayes. You've got a third-generation tactical savant in your company, Sergeant. Hayes nodded. We've noticed, sir. Blackwood returned his attention to Morgan. Private, the Army has training pathways for soldiers with conventional aptitudes. You follow the progression, check the boxes, advance through the ranks. But for individuals with unconventional capabilities, there are different paths, specialized training opportunities that develop those unique aptitudes. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Martinez. Captain Martinez has already initiated the recommendation process. This exercise has confirmed what she suspected. With your permission, I'd like to add my endorsement to the recommendation. Morgan blinked, surprised. What recommendation, sir? Martinez opened the folder. Advanced Individual Training in Tactical Analysis and Asymmetric Response. It's a specialized path for soldiers who demonstrate exceptional adaptive thinking in complex combat scenarios. Following your basic training graduation, Blackwood added, instead of conventional AIT, you would be assigned to a specialized training unit at Fort Bragg. The program identifies and develops soldiers with aptitudes similar to yours. Intuitive tactical reasoning, spatial intelligence, adaptive problem-solving. Morgan struggled to process the implications. I'm honored, sir, but I'm still just learning the basics. Blackwood smiled for the first time. The basics are important, Private, but they're just tools. What matters is how you apply those tools to solve problems no one has prepared you for. That's what separates good soldiers from exceptional ones. The meeting concluded with Blackwood returning to his OPFOR element and Morgan receiving instructions to complete the exercise as planned. But as she returned to her squad, Morgan felt a profound shift in her understanding of her military future. The worst recruit in the platoon had found not just acceptance, but a pathway specifically designed for her unique abilities. The final day of the exercise tested Second Squad's endurance and adaptability to the extreme. OPFOR, seemingly determined to overcome their previous setbacks, launched increasingly sophisticated attacks throughout the day. Each time, Morgan's tactical insights helped the squad anticipate and counter the enemy's approach. By the time the NDX signal sounded, Second Squad had achieved all assigned objectives with minimal simulated casualties. As they marched back to the staging area, exhausted but triumphant, Foster pulled Morgan aside. Whatever happens after graduation, he said, remember that you've already proven yourself where it matters most, in the field, under pressure, with lives depending on your decisions. Morgan nodded, grateful for the reminder. I still have a lot to learn. Everyone does, Foster replied, but not everyone has your foundation to build on. The next morning, as the company assembled for the post-exercise briefing, the battalion commander personally recognized Second Squad for their performance. Adaptation, innovation, and tactical awareness, he said, addressing the entire company. These are the qualities that define effective soldiers in the modern battle space. Second Squad has exemplified these qualities throughout this exercise. His eyes found Morgan in the formation. Some of you have demonstrated exceptional aptitude that will be further developed in specialized training paths. Others have shown the solid reliability that forms the backbone of our military. Both are essential to the Army's mission. As the briefing concluded, Hayes approached Morgan. Right, Captain Martinez wants to see you in her office at 1,300 hours. Seems your future assignments are being finalized. Morgan spent the intervening hours reflecting on her journey through basic training. From the mud-covered recruit stumbling through the barracks door to the soldier who had outmaneuvered a West Point tactical instructor, the transformation seemed impossible. Yet it hadn't really been transformation at all, but revelation. The uncovering of capabilities that had always existed within her, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. At precisely 1,300 hours, Morgan reported to Martinez's office. The captain wasn't alone. Colonel Blackwood was there, along with Hayes and a video conference screen showing a general's insignia. "Private Wright reporting as ordered, ma'am," Morgan said, standing at attention. "At ease, Private," Martinez replied. "We're here to discuss your future assignment following graduation. Colonel Blackwood has something he'd like to tell you first." Blackwood stepped forward. "Private Wright, following yesterday's exercise, I conducted some research into your background and family history. Your grandfather Robert Wright and I served together briefly during my early career. He saved my life during an operation I'm still not authorized to discuss." Morgan stared at him, stunned. "You knew my grandfather personally?" "I did, and I see much of him in you, not just in your tactical thinking, but in your demeanor. Robert never sought recognition or advancement. He simply solved problems that others couldn't, often in ways that defied conventional doctrine." Blackwood gestured to the video screen. "General Lancaster commands the Special Operations Capabilities Development Group. He'd like to speak with you." The general on-screen nodded. "Private Wright, your performance during this exercise has come to our attention through multiple channels. The program Colonel Blackwood mentioned, Advanced Tactical Analysis and Asymmetric Response, is designed specifically for soldiers with your aptitude profile. It's selective and demanding, but it provides a pathway for developing specialized capabilities that standard training can't address." Morgan found her voice. "Sir, I'm honored by the consideration, but I've only just completed basic training. I'm still learning fundamental soldiering skills." The general smiled. "The best candidates for this program are often those who recognize how much they still have to learn. The training builds on basic skills while developing advanced analytical capabilities. It's not about knowing everything. It's about approaching problems from angles others don't see." Martinez handed Morgan a folder containing formal orders. "These will become effective upon your graduation next week. You'll have 10 days of leave, then report to Fort Bragg for the specialized training program." Hayes, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "Right. When you first arrived in my platoon, I saw potential buried under hesitation and self-doubt. Now I see a soldier beginning to understand her capabilities. This program will help you develop those capabilities in ways standard progression never could." As the meeting concluded, Morgan found herself walking alone across the parade ground, her mind still processing everything that had happened. She stopped at the edge, looking back at the training facilities that had transformed her from a struggling recruit into a soldier with a unique future path. Hayes approached, hands clasped behind his back. "Second thoughts, right?" "Not exactly, Drill Sergeant. Just wondering if I'm ready for what comes next." Hayes studied her for a moment. "No one's ever fully ready for their next challenge. That's what makes it a challenge." He looked out across the parade ground. "You know, your grandfather once told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'The Army doesn't create warriors, it reveals them.'" Morgan smiled, recognizing the phrase from her childhood. "He used to say that to me, too." Well, he was right. Basic training doesn't transform people into something they're not. It strips away the unnecessary until what remains is the soldier who was always there. Hayes turned to face her directly. "The worst recruit in my platoon turned out to be exactly the kind of soldier we need most. One who sees possibilities where others see obstacles, who adapts when standard procedures fail, who leads by enabling others to succeed." Morgan stood a little straighter under his gaze. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Drill Sergeant. Even when I was failing at everything, you weren't failing, right? You were learning, not just the skills we were teaching, but how to trust your own instincts when they diverged from conventional approaches." Hayes allowed himself a rare smile. "Your grandfather would be proud of the soldier you've become." As Hayes walked away, Morgan turned her gaze to the setting sun, thinking about the journey that had brought her here and the path that lay ahead. The drill sergeant who had once called her the worst recruit he'd seen in 15 years had helped reveal the soldier she was meant to be, not by breaking her down and rebuilding her in some standardized image, but by challenging her to recognize and trust her unique capabilities. In that moment, standing alone as twilight settled over Fort Benning, Private Morgan Wright finally understood what her grandfather had always known, that some soldiers are forged in the crucible of conventional training, while others are revealed through challenges that demand something more. She had found her place not by becoming someone different, but by embracing the warrior who had always existed within her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The early morning fog clung to Fort Bragg like a shroud as Morgan Wright stepped off the military transport. 2 months had passed since her basic training graduation. 2 months of leave, followed by processing and in-processing that had finally brought her to the headquarters of the Advanced Tactical Analysis and Asymmetric Response Program. A stern-faced sergeant waited beside a nondescript vehicle. "Private Wright?" "Yes, Sergeant. I'm Sergeant Miller. Welcome to ATAAR. Stow your gear and let's move." As they drove through the sprawling base, Morgan took in her surroundings with the heightened awareness she'd developed during training. Fort Bragg housed conventional forces alongside special operations units, creating an environment where different tactical philosophies intersected daily. "First time at Bragg?" Miller asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, Sergeant. The program you're entering has only existed for 3 years," he continued. "It was created to identify and develop soldiers with uncommon aptitudes for complex problem-solving in asymmetric environments." "How many others will be in my class?" Morgan asked. 7. Out of approximately 50,000 soldiers who completed basic training in the past year, 8 were selected for this iteration. 1 dropped out during pre-screening. The implications weren't lost on Morgan. This wasn't just specialized training. It was something far more selective than she'd initially understood. They arrived at a cluster of buildings separated from the main base, surrounded by training areas designed to simulate diverse environments, urban landscapes, dense forest, desert terrain, and mountain features all within a compact area. "This is Operational Training Area Echo," Miller explained. "Your home for the next 6 months. If you complete the initial phase successfully." The "if" hung in the air like a challenge. Morgan hefted her bag and followed Miller into what appeared to be the administrative building. Inside, she found not the sterile military efficiency she expected, but something closer to an advanced university setting. Maps covered the walls. Tactical simulations ran on large screens, and small groups huddled around tables discussing scenarios that looked nothing like conventional warfare problems. Miller led her to a conference room where 6 other soldiers waited, 3 men and 3 women ranging in age from early 20s to mid-30s. None wore rank insignia. "Our final arrival," announced a woman in civilian clothes who stood at the head of the table. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Reeves, Program Director. In this facility, we dispense with formal military protocols except during field exercises. Everyone is addressed by name, regardless of rank or position. It fosters open exchange of ideas without hierarchical constraints." Morgan took the empty seat, noting the diversity of the group. Unlike basic training's relative uniformity, these soldiers came from visibly different backgrounds and specialties. "Each of you was selected because you demonstrated unusual aptitudes in tactical thinking," Dr. Reeves continued. "Some, like Wright here, showed their capabilities during basic training. Others were identified during combat deployments or specialized operations. What you share is an ability to see patterns others miss and devise solutions that defy conventional doctrine." She activated a wall screen showing statistics and performance metrics for each participant. Morgan was startled to see her own name at the bottom of several categories. "Don't be concerned by these initial metrics," Dr. Reeves said, noting Morgan's expression. "They simply reflect your relative experience level. This program isn't about where you start, it's about how you think." The other participants introduced themselves briefly. Chen, former intelligence analyst with 2 deployments to Afghanistan. Rivera, combat engineer who had devised unprecedented solutions to counter IED threats. Dawson, helicopter pilot whose innovations had saved a downed crew in hostile territory. Each story reinforced the realization that Morgan was now among exceptional soldiers with proven records. When her turn came, Morgan felt acutely aware of her relative inexperience. "Private Wright. I just completed basic training at Fort Benning." Wright outmaneuvered a tactical instructor from West Point during her final exercise. Dr. Reeves added, surprising Morgan with her knowledge of the details. using terrain features considered impassable to redirect an enemy force into a prepared ambush position. The others looked at Morgan with new interest, particularly Chen, whose analytical gaze suggested he was reassessing his initial impression. "You'll find we're well informed about each of your capabilities," Dr. Reeves continued. "Now, let's discuss what you'll be doing here." The program structure she outlined was unlike anything Morgan had encountered in military literature. Rather than a fixed curriculum progressing through predetermined scenarios, ATAAR operated more like an advanced problem-solving laboratory. Participants would face increasingly complex challenges designed to stretch their adaptive capabilities while developing fundamental skills in areas ranging from environmental analysis to psychological operations. "We don't teach you what to think," Dr. Reeves explained. "We refine how you think, then provide you with the tools to implement your insights effectively." The day concluded with each participant being assigned individual quarters, small but private rooms that reflected the program's focus on independent thinking and personal development. As Morgan unpacked her few belongings, a knock came at her door. It was Rivera, the combat engineer. "Some of us are gathering in the common area," she said. "Thought you might want to join." In the communal space, Morgan found Chen, Dawson, and Rivera engaged in casual conversation that rapidly shifted to professional interests. They discussed their paths to the program, experiences that had shaped their tactical thinking, and expectations for the training ahead. "I still don't understand how they identified us," Dawson admitted. "What metrics could possibly capture adaptive thinking across such different specialties and experience levels?" "It's not metrics," Chen replied. "It's outcomes. Each of us has solved problems that shouldn't have been solvable with the resources available. That's the common thread." Morgan listened, absorbing their perspectives while wrestling with her own doubts. Unlike the others, she hadn't saved lives in combat or innovated under fire. She'd simply applied intuitive understanding to training scenarios. "You're wondering if you belong here," Rivera observed, catching Morgan's expression. "The thought crossed my mind," Morgan admitted. "We all bring different capabilities," Rivera said. "Your record shows you can think several moves ahead in tactical situations, anticipate responses and counter-responses. That's rare, especially without combat experience to inform it." "It's like chess players," Chen added. "Some need to play thousands of games to develop strategic intuition. Others have it naturally and just need to learn the pieces and rules. You're in the latter category." The conversation continued late into the evening, gradually building connections that transcended their diverse backgrounds. By the time Morgan returned to her quarters, she felt less like an outlier and more like part of a specialized team assembled for their complementary capabilities. Training began before dawn the next day with physical conditioning that pushed even the most fit participants to their limits. Unlike basic training's standardized approach, ATAAR's physical program was personalized to address each soldier's specific weaknesses and development needs. Morgan's program emphasized explosive strength and fine motor control under stress, capabilities essential for the close-quarters combat scenarios where her size might otherwise be a disadvantage. The individualized attention was both challenging and affirming. It suggested the program truly was designed to develop their unique potential rather than force them into predetermined molds. The physical training transitioned seamlessly into the first cognitive challenge, a terrain analysis exercise conducted in a simulated environment that changed subtly as they worked. What began as a straightforward assessment of defensive positions in mountain terrain gradually incorporated factors like civilian movement patterns, resource limitations, and psychological elements affecting troop behavior. Morgan found herself drawing on lessons from hunting with her grandfather. Not just technical skills of tracking and navigation, but deeper insights about how terrain shapes behavior, how people naturally move through spaces, and how to anticipate decisions based on environmental factors. When they presented their analyses, the diversity of approaches proved striking. Chen had created a probability matrix predicting enemy movement based on historical patterns. Rivera had focused on manipulating the terrain itself to channel movement. Dawson had integrated aerial perspectives that revealed patterns invisible from ground level. Morgan's approach synthesized elements of each, with a particular emphasis on how terrain features influenced psychological decision-making under stress. When Dr. Reeves asked her to explain her reasoning, Morgan struggled to articulate what felt like intuitive understanding. "I just see it," she admitted finally. "The way water shapes the land over time creates natural movement channels. People follow these unconsciously unless they're specifically trained not to. What you're describing is pattern recognition operating at multiple levels simultaneously," Dr. Reeves explained. "You're processing terrain features, historical usage indicators, and human behavioral tendencies as an integrated system rather than separate factors. That's exactly the kind of thinking this program aims to develop and refine." The days that followed established a rhythm unlike anything Morgan had experienced in basic training. Mornings began with physically demanding exercises that gradually incorporated tactical elements. Afternoons focused on analytical challenges that grew progressively more complex. Evenings were dedicated to team-based scenarios that required them to combine their diverse approaches. 3 weeks into the program, Morgan found herself paired with Chen for a particularly demanding simulation. They were tasked with developing a security protocol for a remote outpost surrounded by hostile territory, with severely limited resources and unreliable intelligence. "This is impossible," Chen muttered as they reviewed the parameters. "The threat indicators contradict each other, the terrain offers no natural defensive advantages, and we don't have enough personnel to maintain standard security rotations." Morgan studied the simulation data differently, looking not for a perfect solution but for exploitable patterns. "What if we don't try to defend against everything? What if we make ourselves appear more vulnerable than we actually are?" Chen looked up sharply. "You're suggesting deception as the primary defense?" "Not just deception, selective vulnerability," Morgan clarified. "We create apparent weaknesses that channel potential attacks into areas where our limited resources can be most effective." They developed a security protocol that deliberately left certain approaches lightly defended but carefully monitored, while concentrating resources where terrain features created natural advantages. The approach violated conventional security doctrine but maximized the effectiveness of their limited personnel and resources. When they presented their solution, Dr. Reeves nodded with evident satisfaction. "This is precisely the type of adaptive thinking the program aims to develop. Not adherence to doctrine when resources are sufficient, but innovation when they aren't." Morgan and Chen's approach was incorporated into the program's case studies, an acknowledgement that their unconventional solution had merit beyond the specific scenario. For Morgan, it represented a significant milestone, recognition that her intuitive understanding could translate into practical applications with real-world implications. As the program progressed into its second month, the challenges intensified. Participants were now placed in leadership roles during complex field exercises, involving regular troops who hadn't been briefed on the unorthodox approaches ATAAR developed. The friction between innovative tactics and conventional expectations created realistic pressure that tested not just their problem-solving abilities but their leadership and communication skills. During one particularly challenging exercise, Morgan found herself commanding a platoon tasked with securing an objective against a numerically superior force in unfavorable terrain. The conventional approach, a frontal assault supported by covering fire, would result in unacceptable casualties according to the simulation parameters. Drawing on everything she'd learned, Morgan developed an approach that incorporated elements of deception, terrain manipulation, and psychological pressure. She divided her forces into smaller elements that appeared weaker than they were, creating the impression of disorganization while actually establishing an elaborate trap. The regular troops assigned to her command initially resisted the unconventional approach, their training pushing them towards standardized tactics. Morgan found herself having to explain not just what to do but why, translating her intuitive understanding into terms that aligned with their training. "I know this isn't what the manual prescribes," she told a skeptical squad leader, "but think about how water flows around obstacles rather than through them. We're going to do the same with our approach. Flow around their strength and converge where they're vulnerable." The metaphor resonated with the squad leader, whose rural background gave him an intuitive grasp of natural patterns. His support helped convince the others, creating momentum that carried the operation forward. The exercise unfolded exactly as Morgan had envisioned. The opposing force, interpreting Morgan's dispersed elements as signs of weakness, committed to what they believed was an advantageous attack, only to find themselves channeled into precisely the positions where Morgan's limited forces could be most effective. The outcome was decisive. Objective secured with minimal simulated casualties and maximum resource efficiency. But more significant than the tactical victory was the shift in attitude among the conventional troops who had executed the plan. Initial skepticism had transformed into a new appreciation for adaptive approaches that complemented rather than replaced their standard training. "You didn't just win the scenario," Dr. Reeves told Morgan during the debrief. "You changed how those soldiers think about tactical problems." That multiplier effect, influencing how others approach challenges, is ultimately more valuable than any single victory. As the program entered its third month, the participants began specializing based on their demonstrated aptitudes. Chen focused on intelligence analysis and counter-deception operations. Rivera developed expertise in environmental manipulation and resource optimization. Dawson refined techniques for integrated air-ground operations in denied environments. Morgan's path led her toward what the program termed anticipatory tactical design, developing responses to complex threats before they fully materialized. It was a discipline that combined predictive analysis, pattern recognition, and innovative response formulation, leveraging precisely the intuitive capabilities that had first brought her to ATAAR. "Your mind naturally projects current conditions forward through multiple iterations," her instructor explained. "You don't just see what is, you see what could be several moves ahead. Most tacticians have to deliberately develop that capability through years of experience. You do it instinctively." The specialized training pushed Morgan to refine this natural aptitude into a disciplined approach that could be taught to others. She learned to articulate her intuitive understanding in terms that made sense within military frameworks, to translate pattern recognition into actionable intelligence, and to develop training scenarios that could help conventional forces develop similar capabilities. 4 months into the program, the participants faced their most demanding challenge yet, a comprehensive exercise that would test everything they had learned against opponents specifically trained to counter their approaches. Unlike previous scenarios, this one would unfold over 5 days of continuous operations, with minimal resources and high-stakes objectives. The exercise took place in a remote training area designed to simulate a contested border region. Morgan's team, including Chen, Rivera, and 2 regular infantry squads, was tasked with securing key infrastructure while disrupting enemy operations throughout the area. They faced an opposing force led by experienced special operations instructors who had studied ATAAR's methods and developed specific counter-strategies. "They know how we think," Morgan told her team during planning. "They're expecting us to be unconventional, to use deception and indirect approaches, so we need to be unconventional about being unconventional." Her strategy incorporated elements of conventional tactics as cover for highly unorthodox maneuvers, using the opponent's expectations against them. Rather than avoiding established doctrine entirely, they would selectively employ standard approaches to mask their true intentions. The exercise became a complex game of tactical chess, with each side adapting to the other's adaptations in real time. Morgan found herself drawing on everything she had learned, from her grandfather's lessons about reading terrain to ATAAR's advanced concepts of anticipatory design. On the third day, with the situation balanced precariously between success and failure, Morgan made a decision that violated both conventional wisdom and their established plan. Based on subtle indicators and enemy movement patterns, she redirected their main effort away from an apparent vulnerability, sensing a trap. Chen questioned the change. The intelligence didn't support such a radical shift. Rivera argued that they were abandoning a key advantage. But Morgan held firm, trusting the pattern recognition that had become her tactical signature. Hours later, they discovered she had been right. The apparent vulnerability had been an elaborate deception designed to draw them into a devastating ambush. Morgan's decision, based on indicators too subtle for conventional analysis, had saved the operation. "How did you know?" Chen asked later as they established their position for the final phase. Morgan struggled to explain what remained partially intuitive even to her. It wasn't any single factor. It was the relationship between factors, the timing of their movements, the resources they committed elsewhere, subtle terrain modifications that didn't match their apparent strategy. Together they formed a pattern that felt wrong. "Felt wrong," Chen repeated. "That's not exactly something we can teach others." "Maybe not directly," Morgan acknowledged, But we can teach them to trust their own pattern recognition, to develop that sense of when something doesn't align, even if they can't immediately articulate why. The exercise concluded with a narrow victory for Morgan's team, successful achievement of primary objectives despite significant opposition. But the most valuable outcomes weren't reflected in the final score. Each participant had been pushed to their limits, forced to integrate their specialized approaches into a cohesive strategy that could adapt to determined opposition. During the final debrief, Colonel Blackwood, who had observed the entire exercise, addressed them directly for the first time since Morgan had met him during basic training. "What you've accomplished here goes beyond tactical victory," he said. "You've demonstrated that adaptive thinking can be systematically developed and integrated with conventional capabilities. That synthesis, the ability to move fluidly between established doctrine and innovative approaches, represents the future of military problem-solving." As the program entered its final phase, Morgan received unexpected news. Her performance had earned her an opportunity few privates ever received: direct commissioning as a second lieutenant upon completion of the program, followed by assignment to a specialized unit that applied ATAAR methodologies in operational contexts. "This isn't standard procedure," Dr. Reeves explained, "but nothing about your path has been standard. Your capabilities have developed at an accelerated rate that justifies exceptional measures." The news was both exhilarating and humbling. 6 months earlier, Morgan had been the worst recruit in her platoon, struggling with basic marksmanship and tactical movement. Now she was being offered a commission and specialized assignment based on capabilities that had emerged when conventional measures failed. On her final evening at Fort Bragg, Morgan found herself walking along the edge of the training area where so much of her development had occurred. The setting sun cast long shadows across terrain features she had learned to read like a complex text, revealing patterns and possibilities invisible to untrained eyes. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Hayes, the drill sergeant who had once called her the worst recruit he'd seen in 15 years. He was out of uniform, suggesting this wasn't an official visit. "Wright," he said by way of greeting. Or should I say Lieutenant Wright soon. "News travels fast," Morgan observed. "I keep tabs on my former recruits," Hayes replied. "Especially the ones who prove me wrong in interesting ways." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the training area spread out before them like a tactical canvas. "I owe you an apology," Hayes said finally. "I pushed you to the breaking point, thinking it would reveal your capabilities or confirm my assessment that you didn't belong." "It worked," Morgan pointed out. "Just not the way you expected." Hayes nodded. "That's the point. I was looking for you to excel within a conventional framework. Instead, you excelled by showing how limited that framework can be in certain circumstances." Morgan considered this. "I needed both, though. The conventional training gave me the foundation. The pressure revealed how I could build on that foundation differently." "That's what I came to tell you," Hayes said. "As you move forward in your career, as an officer leading others who might not think the way you do, remember that there's value in both approaches. Standard doctrine exists because it works in most situations with most soldiers. Your gift is knowing when and how to transcend it." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the training area in twilight shadows that created new patterns across the familiar terrain. "Your grandfather once told me something I didn't fully understand until I met you," Hayes continued. "The best soldiers aren't those who never fail. They're those who find opportunities in failure that others miss. You failed at almost everything in conventional terms during those first weeks of basic training. But those failures revealed capabilities we might never have discovered otherwise." Morgan smiled at the memory of those difficult early days, the mud-covered uniform, the missed targets, the obstacle course failures that had seemed so devastating at the time. What had appeared to be weakness had ultimately revealed her greatest strength, the ability to find solutions when standard approaches failed. "Whatever unit you lead next," Hayes said as they turned back toward the base, "remember that there might be another Morgan Wright in the ranks, someone struggling with standard methods who has untapped potential for adaptive thinking. Your job won't just be to accomplish the mission, but to recognize and develop those capabilities in others." The next morning, as Morgan prepared to depart for her new assignment, she received a small package from Dr. Reeves. Inside was a weathered compass that looked military in origin, but from a much earlier era. The enclosed note read, "This belonged to your grandfather." Colonel Blackwood kept it all these years as a reminder of the importance of finding one's own way when standard paths fail. He thought you should have it now. May it guide you through terrain both physical and conceptual in the years ahead. Morgan held the compass, feeling the weight of legacy and possibility in equal measure. The worst recruit in the platoon had found not just her place but her purpose, not merely to excel as an individual tactical thinker, but to help create systems where others like her could be identified and developed, before being dismissed as failures by conventional metrics. As she boarded the transport that would carry her to her new assignment, Morgan thought about the journey that had brought her here. From struggling recruit to specialized officer, from doubt to confidence, from following established paths to forging new ones, each step had been necessary, even the painful failures that had revealed her true capabilities. The transport lifted off, carrying her toward challenges she couldn't yet imagine but felt increasingly prepared to face. Whatever terrain lay ahead, physical, tactical, or conceptual, Morgan Wright was ready to navigate it, guided by both the discipline of her training and the intuitive understanding that had always been her unique strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.